Welcome once again. Welcome once again. Tonight's show is Legends from the Asphalt Jungle. Another barroom writers offensive produced by Barca Lounge and Cell Theft Records. This has become almost a quarterly production that these people do for us. And what happens is that there's a certain method or theme or idea that gets floated around, and then the writers write on that. Our writers tonight, again, are Dave Johnston, Eric Greenwalt, Christian Storm, and Mortimer K., and I am your host, Doug Newfer. I will be introducing the legends that will be coming out with portions from my own interurban legends, which are, like all legends, part true, maybe even truer than true. And these all happened, one way or another, along the interurban bike trail south of Seattle. Not a mile later, along the interurban trail, I realized that the dozens of little black boxes, a man in his 30s with a shaved head under the overpass in Kent, had been smashing with a hammer that could have cracked skulls. Probably weren't cash boxes, but sex videotapes. Although they might have been 8-track audio tapes of Black Sabbath and Grand Funk Railroad he could no longer tolerate, let alone find a player to play. This wasn't far from the Justice Center parking lot, where a man had been hacked to pieces with a machete. Before I could have explained how these elements were linked, I saw a group of 6 people with long wood poles who appeared to have been hired to do a routine yet odd job in a drainage ditch, until it was obvious they were working for themselves. Nobody in his right mind would be smashing cash boxes beside a well-traveled bike trail on a Sunday, let alone evidence of embarrassing new musical taste. But I could imagine how certain acts committed on or to videotape must inspire pure rage. That the man with the machete was from where his wife and the victim, who the husband had reason to believe was her lover, were from, came out later, after the police arrived. But not before he stopped to rest, and then went back to work, before they made him stop for good. Now it's my turn to stop to rest and bring you our first reader of the evening, our legendary Mortimer K., whose story is The Couch Job.
Winter is an unforgiving time in Toledo, and this year was no exception as Georgie stepped off the number 36 into an almost full foot of gray slush. Georgie had expectations of effecting his decidedly meager dreams by fancying himself a companion of sorts to mature ladies of means. He got the name of a man from his cousin Arlo, who had given him the name of another man, who had given him another name, and so on until final contact by the name of Big Nick had given him the address of the Starlight Lounge, located behind the Ricky Hotel, just off Water Street on the city's Lower East Side. Zipping up his coat, he shouldered his bag and headed off into the darkening drizzle. An hour later, Georgie blew into the dim light of the lounge, stomping his feet and shaking ice and wet from his person. "Shut the fucking door, boy, you're letting half the city in here," barked a squat double stack of a man behind the bar. Georgie did as he was told, hanging back in the doorway. Coal-fired thoughts fumed and rose above the lowered brows and slumped shoulders of a scattering of patrons in the isolated closeness. Hands loosely cupped around drinks, cigarettes smoldering between tawny fingers or forgotten in nearby ashtrays. None looked his way. "And wipe your goddamn feet," added the bartender. "Don't want you tracking that wet, muddy shit all over my floors." "Hamilton," spoke up a man at the far end of the bar, "you haven't swept this floor more than once a week for as long as I've known you, and I've known you longer than I care to remember." The man fished a crumpled pack of unfiltered smokes from his pocket, and picking up a pack of matches, performed a complex one-handed ritual of pinching and folding, quickly producing a small sulfurous flame which he used to light his cigarette before dropping both pack and matches onto the bar. "Stop hassling the boy. Haven't had any new blood in here in a while." He looked at Georgie. "Come on in, friend. Don't mind Hamilton." His personality got stunted with his growth. Hamilton shot the man a look but said nothing. "Come on, kid. Don't just stand there. Take a load off." The man thumped a bar stool. Georgie needed no second invitation. Taking off his jacket, he sat down, shoving his bag under the bar at his feet. "Name's Hank, kid. What's yours?" "Georgie." "Nice to meet you, Georgie." Hank stuck out a hand, which Georgie shook. "What brings you to a place like this?" "I had a friend back east told me I might be able to find some work out here." A low murmur of amusement rippled through the bar. "Your friend sent you to Toledo, Ohio, in the middle of fucking winter to find a job." Hank laughed before tossing back a shot. "Your friend ain't no friend, or you're just an easy mark, kid. Don't you watch the news or read the papers or nothing? Economy took a shit, kid. There are no jobs here." "Well, I'm looking for a particular kind of work. My friend and a friend of his, and, well, anyways, I'm looking for Mr. Abe Olson. I was told I could find him here." Hamilton looked up from washing glasses. Hank cocked an eyebrow, then laughed again. Kid here thinks he's got what it takes. Give me another round. Hell, give me one for our young lady killer here." The bartender set them up each with a shot of whiskey and a beer back. He gave Georgie a once-over. "Been long in the tooth to be getting into the business, ain't you, kid?" "I'm only 23, Georgie shot back. "Not so bad looking either. I got more of a fair shake than you, old man." He threw back his shot, erupting into a prolonged bout of coughing. "Take it easy, kid," Hank said, patting him on the back, and extended a beer. "Take a sip of this and calm down. Hamilton's just having some fun with you, aren't you, Hamilton?" He gave the barman a meaningful stare. "Oh, yeah, sure. Just a little fun, kid," he answered before refilling their shots. "Gotta check on my other customers. Excuse me." Hank waited until the other man had gone. "I gotta ask you, kid, what got into your head to want to be a gigolo? You watch Midnight Cowboy too many times or something?" "What?" asked Georgie. "Midnight Cowboy. Dustin Hoffman, John Voight. It won a fucking Oscar." Hank downed his beer and lit another smoke. Shit, kid. Next thing you're gonna tell me is you never heard of Tennessee Williams either. Who? Christ, kid. I know whether to laugh or cry, for fuck's sake. You know just about what you got in your pants. You gotta know how to talk, kid. Be able to hold a conversation about more than last week's score at the local bingo hall. Hey, started Georgie before being cut off by a cold blast of winter air. Hank put a hand on Georgie's shoulder and turned him toward the door. That there'd be the man you're looking for, kid. Hey, he hollered. Got someone here who'd like to meet you. Be right with you, gentlemen. Bladder shrunk up to the size of my ex-wife's conscience. Was a quick response as an oversized parka bustled past and disappeared into the men's room. Sorry, kid, I'm not trying to bust your balls. I'm just telling you how it is all, continued Hank, motioning Hamilton for another round. I will say this, though. If you really think you got the goods, I'll put in a good word to Abe for you. Georgie smirked, picking up his shot. Yeah, okay, thanks, Hank. The other man slapped the shot away from Georgie's mouth. Don't you patronize me, boy. I know people, I do. I can make life real tough for a dumb young buck like you. Real tough. And for just a moment, Georgie was afraid. Something in the older man's eyes. Something bright and hard. People pissing on the damn toilet seat in the men's room. Progress. I blame progress. Damn electronic pissers that flush for you and now no one thinks they have to. I ask myself sometimes, would you do this at home? I don't think so. A hand was thrust between Georgie and Hank. Hello, I'm Abe Olson. I believe you wanted to talk to me. A brief apology and another round of drinks later, the three men had moved to a corner booth near the kitchen. Sorry again, I had to ask, said Abe. Big Nick isn't what you'd call a ladies' man. That's all. Business has changed a lot in the last decade. Georgie nodded over his glass. It's not all sex and glory, kid. You gotta be ready for it all. Drugs, guns, cops, jealous husbands, jealous girlfriends, dogs. Hank and Abe laughed. Fucking dogs. Yeah, said Abe. Remember that Persian woman or a little pug? Insisted the damn thing watch? What's the worst thing you guys ever saw? Asked Georgie. Hank and Abe exchanged glances. Come on, prompted Georgie. You guys must have seen some pretty fucked things. Go on, Hank said to Abe. Been a while since I heard it myself. He smiled at Georgie. Hope you don't have a weak stomach, kid. Georgie rolled his eyes, a smart-ass remark caught on his tongue when he noticed Abe's mood had sobered. He stared quietly at the table for a long while. When he looked up, his voice sounded tired. All right, my young Lothario, I shall recount for you the single most heinous experience I have ever had the misfortune to not only witness but be involved in. Abe's steady gaze made Georgie very aware of his dry throat. He picked up his glass and, noticing it was empty, turned to wave down Hamilton, only to see the barman on his way over with a fresh round for the table. The story I am about to tell you, continued Abe, is absolutely true. I only say this being some of the facts may be hard to believe. I again say it is all of it, God's honest truth. Yep, happened right here in this very hotel, Hank chimed in. Hamilton set down their drinks. I'm going to take a break here in a minute. You guys need anything else? Nah, we're good. Abe's just getting ready to tell the kid here about Ida Pembry. Hamilton looked surprised. Oh, come on, Abe, not that fucking story again. You're going to scare the boy. God damn it, Hamilton, barked Hank. I'm paying the fucking tab here. Just shut your yap. You can tell any story goddamn pleases. Hamilton scowled at Hank, turned and walked away. Goddamn right, mumbled Hank. If you're finished, asked Abe. Sorry, go ahead. Abe turned back to Georgie. Now this was years back when I was a younger man like yourself. I just gotten the general manager's job upstairs at the Ricky. He paused. Let's see. I should start from the beginning. It was in '63, just after the Kennedy boy got shot. A well-off couple, Harvey and Ida Pembry, had just arrived from New York and checked into one of our suites, room 318. Harvey worked for a talent firm in Los Angeles, and Ida was his well-heeled socialite arm dressing, if you take my meaning. There had been rumors of her having been a brief sycophant of Howard Hughes. Georgie's face gave no recognition. Howard Hughes, Abe turned to Hank. Don't bother, answered Hank. Just keep going. Abe sighed. Anyway, Mr. Pembry thought Toledo might be a good place to keep his wife, someplace where she could cool her heels a while and stay out of trouble. It was several weeks after their arrival I was made aware of some of her more discreet needs by her domestic, Thomas Browerton. It seems with Mr. Pembry's lengthy trips to the coast, Miss Pembry had developed, shall we say, a taste for younger men. A taste Mr. Pembry was more than willing to turn a blind eye to, what with his tiresome job of finding fresh young talent for several of the major Hollywood studios. It was at this time I met our friend Hank. Yep, I remember it like it were yesterday. Truly the beginning of a beautiful partnership. I had an inn in one of the classiest hotels in the city and the number of the general manager in my pocket. Of course, if I'd known it was going to end us up both here, I would have asked for a bigger cut at the time. Hank? Asked Abe. Yeah. Shut up. Sorry. Like Hank was saying, we started a business relationship. Once or twice a week, I would get a message from Browerton. I would then make a phone call to Hank. At a prearranged time, I would meet one of Hank's friends at the service entrance. We would take the loading elevator up to the 3rd floor where we'd meet Browerton. Money would exchange hands, and that was that. All in all, it was a fairly simple and lucrative arrangement for everyone involved. It didn't hurt Miss Pembry was fairly easy to please as compared to some of our other moneyed clients. No unreasonable demands, no tantrums. Abe tossed back his shot. She would go out on occasion when friends visiting from New York or Los Angeles were in town, but mostly kept to herself in her rooms. Yes, it was all going quite well until Mr. Pembry's death in '65. It was all over the Hollywood papers. Abe held up his hands, running them across an invisible headline. Harvey Pembry, found dead in home of RKO studio executive. It would seem Mr. Pembry had been enjoying the affections of a young starlet who just happened to be engaged to one of the studio heads who, upon coming home one afternoon, found the two in bed and shot them both. Jesus, breathed Georgie. Miss Pembry did not take the news well. She began to distance herself from old acquaintances, instead preferring the company of palm readers or so-called spirit mediums. In her deepening depression, she spent a small fortune over the next several months on finding some sign of her dearly departed from beyond the veil. Harvey Pembry never answered. Then one night came a message from Browerton. Miss Pembry had requested one of Hank's friends for the evening. I made the call, thinking maybe Miss Pembry had finally tired of the spirit world and needed some of the comforts only the physical can provide. I met the young man at the service entrance, and we took the elevator up to 318. When the doors opened, Browerton was there to meet us with money as usual. I thought perhaps things might be looking up for Miss Pembry, as well as for Hank and myself. A few hours later, I received a rather distressing phone call from Browerton asking me to come upstairs. It seemed things had gotten a bit out of control and some delicate, discreet help was required. I was met at the door and quickly ushered inside by Thomas. He led me down the dimly lit hallway past the main rooms to the bathroom. Turning on the light and closing the door, he pulled aside the shower curtain to show me the boy. Dried blood was under his nose and on his lips. His naked body was covered with dark yellow bruises and what could only be bite marks. His breathing was shallow, but he was breathing. Browerton then explained he had called a doctor who lived nearby, about 20 minutes uptown, who had been a close friend of the Pembrys, a man who could keep a secret for the right price. I asked how such a small woman as Miss Pembry could have beaten a grown man so savagely. He didn't reply, only asked me to help him get the boy out of the suite and downstairs to a car waiting to take him uptown. Damn it, Thomas, I grabbed him by the arm and made him look at me. The hell's going on? Panic flooded his expression. Be quiet, he hissed. You'll wake her up. Just help me and I'll tell you what I know later. Help me. The man's fright was contagious, as I had a sudden urge to cut and run. All right, we're going to talk about this after. Fine, just help me. Each taking an arm, we hoisted the boy out of the tub and began walking back down the hall. As we passed the main sitting room, I heard a noise and stopped to look. There in the dull gray, I saw a great hulking shape seated on the couch. Surely, I thought, that is not Miss Pembury. The few times I had seen her, she'd been a slight woman of no more than 100 pounds. I felt a tug and turned to see Broughton's eyes wide, urging me to move. Deciding my questions would be answered later, we carried the unconscious young man to the elevator and out to the service entrance to the car. Broughton then handed me a small stack of bills. I counted it. $500. Just pretend tonight never happened, he said before walking back inside, leaving me in the alley with my fist wrapped around money for questions I wasn't allowed to ask. Hank said he would be able to find young men more suited to the kind of entertainment Miss Pembury now craved, and so began a series of late-night excursions to the good doctor. One boy had come away missing an ear with several cracked ribs. He'd been put on a plane to L.A. with enough money to start fresh and the number of a plastic surgeon. Hamilton appeared with another round for the table. "Thanks, Hamilton," said Hank. "Can I get a fresh pack of smokes?" "Sure. Anything else?" "I'll take another shot," said Georgie, setting down his empty. "And nobody called the police or anything?" he asked Abe. Money has a strange way of keeping people quiet, and this situation was no exception. But all things must come to an end. Abe tossed back his shot. "Hamilton, I'll take another." He rubbed his eyes. "Like I said, all things must come to an end." One night, after sending an escort up to 318, I received a phone call from Broughton asking me to please come up. Riding the elevator, I tried to ready myself for anything, not knowing there was no preparing for what I was about to see. Broughton was sheet white and shaking when I opened the door. There were dark circles underneath his eyes, and he looked as though he'd been recently ill. "Oh, God, Abe. Her eyes. Her goddamn eyes." He grabbed me by the collar, leaning closer. "What have I done, Abe? Her eyes go everywhere. No matter where you run, she can still see you. Somewhere out there in the dark, she will find you. She'll..." He trailed off as his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor like a rag doll. The stench hit me then. How you couldn't smell it in the hallway, I had no idea. It seemed to stop just inside the doorway like the surface of some ethereal Stygian fog. Pulling a handkerchief from my pocket, I stepped over Thomas and moved farther into 318. The temperature dropping with each step, I saw a light issuing from the main sitting room and followed it to a sight I will never forget. There she was, this naked giant like some Paleolithic beast regurgitated from the past, skin red and chafed from the fabric of the couch. The thing itself rubbed bare, a large discolored stain spreading from the centered cushions. A new smell of rank intestinal discharge and boiled ham assaulted, causing me to hold the wall and dry heave. The boy had been torn open, the right leg jutting out at a sickly angle. The flesh of the hip had been gnawed through to the pelvic ridge. Ida Pembury's great bulk loomed over the body, her massive jaw buried in the torso, rhythmically crunching through tendons and hard muscle. A hand came down on my shoulder, and I gave a rather unmanly shriek, turning to see Brenton standing behind me, his eyes wide, staring into the room. His hands flew to his lips as he hitched forward. A thin spurt of bile dribbled from between his fingers. The mammoth head jerked up at the sound. Skin and viscera hung from the maw. I found myself staring into the visage of hell. Her eyes, sickly yellow orbs staring out from the deep folds of what had once been Ida Pembury's face. A low intestinal growl issued from the depths of the beast's gut as she sat back on her massive haunches. Her naked gore spattered flesh swayed and settled. One meaty hand wiped bloodied pulp from her mouth and down across her prodigious breasts. After what seemed an eternity, as we stared at each other across the slaughter, she gave forth a gaseous belch before resuming her meal. I was frozen with fear, my breath coming with some difficulty as my mind raced with how to react, let alone deal with such a situation. Fortunately, fate took the opportunity to step in and provide the solution. Quite suddenly, the fleshy colossus reared back, hands clawing at her throat. Slipping in blood, she fell backward into the wall, her legs kicking the boy's eviscerated corpse across the slick floor. I could hear Browerton retching behind me as the beast pushed herself to her feet, only to pitch forward onto the couch before rolling to the floor. The great bosom heaved one final time as the tongue lolled from the side of her open mouth and a gout of stinking meat and bile erupted from her throat before the body lay still, deflating as various gases expectorated. "Is she dead?" a weak voice asked from behind me. "Why don't you go find out?" I snapped. After a short deliberation, we agreed to examine her together. She had choked to death on one of the boy's rib bones, which I had removed from her throat with a long pair of silver-plated tongs from the kitchen. Deciding no one else outside of our small group needed to know the truth about what had happened, I made a phone call to Hank and asked him to come up and help with the cleanup. "Thanks again for including me in your reindeer games there, Abe." "Anytime," he answered wryly before continuing. We wrapped up what was left of the boy and any scattered pieces in the plastic shower curtain and left him in the hallway while we mopped up the blood and washed down Miss Pembury as best we could. We covered her in a clean sheet, and knowing no one would miss the boy, took his body to the basement and put the remains into the furnace. After, I called the police and the paramedics, who pronounced her dead from asphyxiation while sleeping. There was a bit of a media circus when the body was taken out of the hotel, and business was never the same after that. I stayed on as general manager until '88, when I decided to retire and live off some investments I had made with the money from my pension, and some of what I had made from my business partnership with Hank. He smiled, which, as you can see, is still quite profitable. Hank laughed. "Yeah, we're rolling in it all right." Georgie sat quietly for a while, smoking one of Hank's cigarettes. "That was a really fucked up story." "You asked for it, kid," said Hank. I suppose I did. Hamilton walked up to the table with another round of shots and beer. "Like I said, kid, there ain't no jobs around here, at least not the kind you're looking for, but I think Hamilton here might have something for you. It's not glamorous, but it pays. I need someone in the dish pit. If you're interested, you can start tonight. Even have a room in the back you can stay in until you get set up." "What do you say, kid?" asked Hank. Georgie didn't think it over too long. "It's better than nothing. I'll take it." "Well, good," smiled Hamilton. "Come on, I'll show you around back." Hank watched them both as they disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. He shook a smoke out of his pack, and lighting it, turned to Abe. "You think he believed it? Do any of them?" "Yeah. How soon till we take him up?" "Oh, maybe a week or so. She'll be good and hungry by then."
Mortimer K., thank you. The white man with the shaved head, whose wife or girlfriend or teenage daughter might have been captured on videotape, engaging in auditions for pornographers or procreative acts of revenge, was plausibly one of the many from the former USSR who moved here. Suppose I were to tell you that a trial now playing at the Kent Justice Center Open Court Drive-In Theater features screenings of videotaped evidence made in the motel rooms of Tukwila, that a rabid Russian was caught in the act of despoiling on the interurban trail. For years in this park, on the same green river that made a name for a man who strangled countless prostitutes and buried them along its banks. On Saturdays, boys, wielding realistic medieval weapons, have performed battles to carry out instructions given by board games, where spurs from the tracks running parallel to the trail cross this thoroughfare recently posted signs warn of remote control locomotives without human engineers that may kill or mutilate anyone in their path, as if in order to absolve the railroad of liability. Although speed limit laws are commonly known and enforced in cities all across America, there are, along one road running parallel to the trail through a Renton warehouse district where nobody lives legally if camping is a crime, signs that prohibit racing in the streets. I've heard stories about Christian Storm, but I don't know if they're true. Either she used to race in the streets and boys would bet on whether she would win, or boys would race for her. That's the way it is with these legends. Maybe she'll set us straight tonight with her story. Urban Legends, Christian Storm.
All right. Urban legends. Modern stories with obscure origins are our heroes and heroines of sublime messages, contained in community capsules, holding just enough mythology to capture our imaginations, as well as our collective desire to believe in stereotypes because that lets us off the hook. Lets us ignore the dark amulet dangling from our necks, daring us not to believe in its protective powers. Urban legends, the modern folklore that tells the story that makes the myths that we believe, the pervasive realities that we want desperately to believe, those beliefs allowing us to hold tightly to things we trust will stop us from feeling fear, from feeling anxiety, from feeling guilt or discomfort, stop us from feeling much of anything that feels like too much. Stop us from reflecting on, reflecting about, or even reflecting ourselves to ourselves. The darker sides of folklore, dangling and dancing inside our amulets. Colorfully coded language, kaleidoscopic metaphors and dicey descriptions doing the dirty work for all of us so we can step graciously to one side and with a gallant sweep of an arm declare ourselves democratic, progressive, deeply in tune. While shielding ourselves from our own reflection, banging desperately on the other side of the glass, dangling around our necks, screaming hoarsely, "Look, look, look at me, look at me, look, please, 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 look at me!" Because to not be seen is a pain of no equal. To be told you are not worthy of being seen is to feel a whirling vacuum of numbing ice, a black mass pulsing in a never-ending free fall, a murder of crows screeching their talons, scraping your internal organs from the inside out. Urban legends are modern stories of obscure origin with little or no supporting evidence that spread spontaneously in varying forms and often have elements of humor, moralizing, or horror. The suspended amulet scatters reflected images, a mirage of elements, humorous, moralizing, and horrific. And meanwhile, a prison of mythologies try to disguise the truth inside, the truth of women whose bodies are still contested terrain, whose pregnant bodies are more likely to die from homicide but domestic violence than any other cause of death, who need conventions, conferences, declarations, ratifications to voice the idea that we should be safe and not abused. Of Jewish people, blood libel, the accusation that Jews murder Christian children, make matzah for Passover, Black Death, Jewish people being blamed for the bubonic plague and then murdered for causing it, the protocols of the Elder of Zion, the mythical plan of Jewish world domination, 9/11, they knew. An attempted genocide that is still held up for debate as if it were an agenda item in a historical society meeting and not a historical event of horrifyingly egregious proportions. A people of color, the Casual Killing Act, whose faces overly represent images of criminals on television and movies and news of all kinds, despite being out-criminalized by whites 2-1. Crack, the drug, introduced to communities through devious means, which has a whispered urban legend all its own. Crack, the organization. Children requiring a caring community whose goal is to permanently or temporarily sterilize women with substance abuse problems and is located in primarily, if not exclusively, near communities of color. That community spelled with a K is an interesting choice, perhaps with a story of its own. Of immigrants, that illegal has become an acceptable way to describe a human being. Of Asian and Pacific Islander men and women from all different regions and ethnicities who get told they speak good English on a regular basis by English speakers who don't know good grammar or good manners. From the website Urban Legends. Dear Urban Legends, I received an email last week which was quite disturbing and to say the least disgusting. It's about dead babies that can be bought from hospitals in Taiwan for $70 to meet the high demand for grilled and barbecued babies. I'm sure this must be a hoax, although the message comes with an attached slideshow showing how the baby is prepared, cooked, and eaten. A slideshow? That's a dizzying laser-light show of color sustaining a mythos of whiteness and cultivating fear, the fear that if we stop looking sideways at race, turn to face it directly, it will kill us. America was built on the fear of being killed, murdered by the spirits of dead Native Americans who, despite their affinity for nature, are still pretty pissed off. Or the ghosts of slaves who won't just get over it. Killed by the apparitions of angry feminists wielding books large enough to snap a spine. Or by trans teenage phantoms battered to death by bullies. Murdered by ethereal Latinos who are already invisible to the white eye. Or by marginalized shadows, persistent visions, and Empyrean allies who struggle alongside celestial hallucinations of revenge and liberation. So fearful that people like Dr. Linnaeus, not an urban legend, but a scary motherfucker nonetheless, had to make systems and lay the claim of science to mythology. Dr. Linnaeus, the founding father of taxonomy, using the whites of his white eyes, classified plants, animals, and humans according to shared physical characteristics, and then he established a system of hierarchical classification for them. His classifications, based on divisions that were biologically and taxonomically unsound, shocker, I know, established whole bodies of very questionable scientific research which persists today. Read the bell curve if you have any doubts about its current manifestations. Not surprisingly, Dr. Linnaeus is also known as the father of scientific racism. His categories, Africaneus, Americaneus, Asiaticus, Europeaneus, and Monstrosus. They were based on place of origin first and then later on skin color. Each race had certain characteristics that he considered endemic to individuals belonging to it. Native Americans were caloric, red, straightforward, eager, and combative. Africans were phlegmatic, black, slow, relaxed, and negligent. Asians were melancholic, yellow, inflexible, severe, and avaricious. Europeans were sanguine and pale, muscular, swift, clever, and inventive. The Monstrosus, humans, included such entries as the agile and faint-hearted dwarf of the Alps, the Patagonian giant, and the Menorcid Hottentot. Science. Science. Or consider drapetomania, a supposed mental illness described by American physician Samuel A. Cartwright in 1851 that caused black slaves to flee captivity. Or hysteria, a mental health diagnosis used to deny the pervasive reality of sexual abuse among women patients. Homosexuality was defined as a mental illness until 1973, and currently trans people must endure diagnosis of gender identity disorder in order to receive hormones or surgery. Damn! That's That's a dizzying whirlwind of refracted horror, medicalized murderous mayhem. That's a lot of ducking and dodging to really see anything, anyone. That's a deep commitment to stop seeing with the heart and start seeing with a narrow vision through eyes connected to words, connected to language used to build the myths and legends of fictitious worlds that factually fuck people up. So, we're upside down and sideways, sleeping with one eye open and the other eye desperate to remain shut in a dream world where elements become fluid enough to roll with anxiety, ebb and flow with diagnostic dilemmas of what makes sense in an insane insanity dressed up in a crazy making mockery of normal. The devil's in the details. Designing plans so you forget the devil exists by believing in something else. A cosmic magic trick to blunt our curiosity and numb the cultural hangover from a multi-century binge. 20% of the world's population takes 80% of prescription opioids. Guess who's taking all those pills? Americans. Not that the pharmaceutical companies aren't trying to lay the claim of both science and mythology and culture, exporting emotions alongside medications to take care of that messy, mucky human interaction stuff. Making sadness depression, grief, catatonia, joy, mania, and rage at trauma and abuse, borderline personality disorder. Now that's a cultural commitment to numb, and a firm dedication to not see, not feel the reality of ourselves. The devil's in the moment. You know that moment. When darkness creeps in on scabby knees, when violence and abuse descends on your left shoulder, whispering sweet somethings you just rather not hear. And it just feels easier to sit on your bar stool or your friend's couch and do another shot or flip through more channels because, well, they have cable and you don't. And it just feels easier to keep drinking or watching or shopping or eating or ask for a prescription to take care of those goddamn creatures clinging to your shoulder. And it just feels easier until that moment when the numb wears off, that horrifying moment that we collectively feel pulsing in our national bloodline, our blood, our bloody history. And that moment creates enough cultural anxiety that we cling to mythical band-aids manufactured by fictitious legends, hoping beyond hope that the band-aid will provide enough triage for the gaping, open wounds. They are, of course, unsuitable for the job. So then what? What do we do? What do we do with this gaping open wound and a handful of Hello Kitty band-aids that are woefully inadequate? Well, we let the poets write what they were told not to write, and we listen. We let the artists draw what they were told not to see, and we believe. We let the musicians drop a backbeat to the stories they were told not to forget, and we remember. We let the dancers dance, the painters paint, the storyteller tell. We let the dreamers dream, and we love them for it. We let the healers heal, and we provide sustenance for them. We let the children play, and we do not diagnose them for it. We hold on to each other and do not try to cut out the bad parts like cancer. People are not cancer. We are wounded, over-medicated, sick, numb, disconnected, malnourished, and traumatized. We are wild creatures pinned in cage, desperate to find happiness. Let our legend be our transformation, our mythos, our transmutation. Let our urban legends seek heroes and heroines who are complicated, damaged seekers of accountability and radical justice, rather than seeking a stereotype plotline and neat resolution. Let us all not try to have everything neatly tied in a bow that can, in a wicked blink of an eye, look more like a noose. Our heroes and heroines are waiting in the wings of our heart, sleeping inside our closed fists, biding their time. Their syncretic dreams of liberation, vivid, rich, still lives, needing only a breath, your breath, to come to life. Let us dream big and wide and spacious. Let us breathe deep and slow. Our imaginations are calling us back. We need our poets, our writers, our painters, our sculptors, our dancers, our construction workers, cooks, chefs, waiters, our musicians. We need our teachers and students, singers, actors, and artists and dreamers. We need all of us to be architects, to build a new folklore and a new mythology capable of containing the labyrinthine course of healing. And this healing can be the obscure story that rises above incertitude and disinterest and finds its rightful place among all our legends. There were funny parts you didn't laugh at. Okay. I have a couple more. The breakup call. The ring, the pain, the hello, goodbye, the rage, the constant ringing, ringing, ringing. The hope, no hope, it feels like shame as you try to remember your part in this mess. The pursuit, building relationships out of a history of nuts, like linking Legos sideways. It's not enough to trust you. It's not enough to hope. We're seesawing in irregular balance, woozy and lightheaded as we fling each other around on the end of the seesaw, trying to trust from a distance, trying to learn to trust by not falling. It's not enough to stage a fire of concern without a flame of security. I'm tingling and numbing pain, nerves riding just under my skin, paper thin, like static electricity buzzing, and I'm desperately trying not to have hope and hold on to all the hope in the world. A free, falling, dizzying direction spin, watching you learn to love by loving someone else. Oh, the bureaucracy of loving and the paperwork of pain, filing documents to destroy the part of me that thumps with an aching, numb. I'm not listening, I'm listening, I'm not listening, I'm listening so hard, my eyes hurt. Filled with tears, ready to dispel truth with the blink of an eye and the drop of salty water diluted with long past hope. I'm holding on to something and letting go of everything. A free fall, dizzying direction spin, watching you learn to love by loving someone else. I'm sleeping, I can't sleep, I'm dreaming, I can't dream, and I'm so still, I don't even think I'm breathing. But I must be. I'm exhaling, I'm not exhaling. I'm smiling and I'm so sad. My face moves down towards the unanswered question, the unasked question, hanging there, taking up all the space in the world. The unoffered reassurance left dangling in the absence, the clipped phrase, the dangled metaphor, the partially heard words, watching you learn joy by being happy with someone else. How can I sustain? I'm sustaining, I'm not sustaining, I am sustaining change. Okay. This is the smallest of motions. Sitting on a bus, steaming up the windows. I'm reading the novel, being distracted by remembering the smell of fresh air and by the stench of a bus full of people trying not to make contact. They're all sweating from the effort to not make contact. I space out and find myself staring at the fleshy neck of an old woman. Her plastic rain cap indenting the thick skin on her chin as she bounces, a little bit more than necessary over each pothole the bus hits. She stares determinedly out the window, her line of vision only as wide as the space between her eyes. She sees not to the sides of her, only in front, where the eyes of the innocent belong. Her purse, her bag, her baggage, holds her in place with the weight of responsibility of a woman her age. It anchors her to her seat, a life raft in a sea of possibilities. Her plastic raincoat crackles as she bounces, and at each crackle she unconsciously purses her lips, making a number of little lines which viciously indent the pink of her lipstick. Her head nods almost imperceptibly, as if consenting to the crackle-pop snap of her baggage and clothes. Crackle-purse nod, crackle-purse nod, crackle-purse nod. She goes on, becoming a single motion, and I no longer have to focus to see her. She's just simply there. I notice her hands rubbing together, wringing each swollen finger softly but with a swift, severe motion. Hands that may have spanked. Hands that may have washed out tiny mouths with soap for swearing. Hands that have been inside her and hands that may have well been inside another woman. Hands that have had lives of their own and stories to tell. Hands that never stop moving. She never stops moving. Something is always restlessly jerking, nodding, ringing, tapping, patting, rubbing, but with the smallest of motions as to not take up too much space. The flesh on her hands is spotting and hangs in little clumps off the bones in her wrists, jangling as the bus moves along. My mind makes images, imagining histories she may have had. I picture her young and alone, married and naked. I picture her and her husband walking hand in hand through a park in the late afternoon. I picture her sleeping with a woman half her age, their bodies entwined after an afternoon of sex. I picture her arguing across a round Formica kitchen table, angry and yelling, spittle shooting from her lips. I picture her crying and banging her fists on her leg. She sits with her back rammed flat on the backrest, but primly so she picks up no excess dirt. swollen ankles pushing out of tight feminine shoes with a sensible style and non-traction grip, so she must grab onto everything she can when she walks so she won't slip and fall. What a careful life, I'm thinking. What a delicate way to be. But she's indestructible, as time has proven, and it's making her wear each of her years, like in rings on the skin of her face. And I begin to count the lines around her mouth when she purses, making up numbers for the ones that disappear when she unpurses to nod. And as I'm wondering if women like trees have rings to count for their time spent, she gets up to leave. She gets up, looking at no one but smiling just in case, slowly rising and holding on to first the back of a seat, the exit handrails, and finally the pole of a bus line. As the bus pulls away, she's inhaling slowly, her shoulders rising towards a rainy sky, then dropping heavily under the weight of her handbag, carrying all of the things a sensible woman her age should have. I turn to watch as she shuffles slowly down the street, putting one sensible foot quite sensibly in front of the other, looking quite firmly, quite directly, only ahead. Thanks. This last one is short. Last one is short. I'm looking down at the shadow called your face, closed like a book, like a door, like a window at night, reflecting me to me. I'm looking down at clasped hands, squeezing fingers, trying to knead out the pain, need the need to know, to remember in order to heal out. I'm shutting off like electricity, or the fading light that dances on your eyelids when you try to sleep. I'm looking across a desert of tragedies, swallowing sand. I want to unzip my skin and show you the parallel tracks of our scars, because we are not so much different as we are simply not the same thing. Thanks.
Christian Storm, thank you. Now, Legends from the Asphalt Jungle will take a 10-minute break. I invite you to visit the merchandise table and rush the bar. See you in a bit. Okay, we're going to get started again. Welcome back to the Barroom Writers Offensive. Tonight's feature is the Legends from the Asphalt Jungle. And I will resume with my own Legends from the Interurban Trail. Everything here I say is true, more or less. Not long before the parking lot machete murder, the body of a hobo with a fractured skull was found between a toilet near the skateboard park upwind from the Kent Justice Center. Anybody who was ever set foot in would never use again. And the park where the boys play war. After Emerald Downs was built, on the trail in Auburn, I would regularly ride to the track, passing older malt liquor drinkers and younger skateboarders, and at one stretch between Renton and Kent, men of a certain timeless age who strolled alone without wearing shirts. Long after Longacres was demolished and the trail was extended to go by its old entrance, I met a woman who used to spend nights there in the grandstand with other runaways the guards let stay, where I spent so many summer afternoons was watching my money run away. It might have been the Philippines, but it wasn't Mexico, where the machete killer and his wife and victim came from. I was surprised to learn after it came out in the news because of the music I heard more frequently there in the valley under the volcano, Mount Rainier. It was during the rainiest month ever recorded in or around Seattle, making the ditch deep and wide as the roadside streams in Florida that can swallow a truck as alligators devour its driver. And so, the stick people may have thought salmon could have come this far to spawn. The Green River from the Duwamish from Puget Sound runs close to here. And so, the ditch may have once been a stream where, despite all chemical and physical obstacles, salmon had no choice but to return via conduits and ditches to spawn. Returning once again to Barca Lounge, perhaps to spawn, or at least to give us his spawned legend, please welcome Eric Greenwalt and The City Dances Death.
Thank you. I stood under the wet light thrown from the dripping street lamp across the flooded alley. Rain poured from the brim of my hat as I struggled to keep my cigarette lit. Holding my coat tight at the collar, I thought about holding him the same way. I waited, letting the events of the last few days, hell, the last few weeks, flow through me like filthy water down the gutter. It flowed. In my line of work, I had to do a lot of math. 6 rounds, 8 rounds. You gotta keep count of how many times you pulled the trigger. And you gotta keep adding. Add it all up longhand and show your work. That's how I ended up here, waiting to finish the job, waiting for Detective O'Toole, waiting to show my work one last time. A few days ago, I was on my way out. This rat was jumping ship, a ship called This City. Only that ship wasn't leaving, it was sinking, and fast. It all started with that phone call. I was packing my life raft, 500 G's, and off to a new life. But when the ship goes down, it sucks the rats right back in with it. The vermin. Me. Yeah, I know who I am. What I am. Callahan. Sam Callahan. A rat on the run with no place to hide, and a trail of bodies behind me that turned into a leash. A leash that was picked up and yanked by a one detective Seamus O'Toole. And if this mutt knew what was good for him, he would stay put and listen. Good boy. The phone ringing stopped me in my tracks as I was packing my meager belongings by flashlight, keeping the room dark. No need for visitors. The suitcase was already full of cash, neatly stacked. I threw in extra ammo, the Luger, a carton of smokes, and a towel for good measure, then slipped the 45 into my waistband. I traveled light. This rat doesn't want to sink, not alone anyways. Dim, flashing neon filtered into the dark room through the blinds as I closed the latch on the bag. Hearing the phone ring froze me. The dark and cigarette smoke was cut by a still blade of light as the staccato ringing sliced into my spine. I dropped my cigarette and killed the flashlight, motionless. The phone rang again. As I held the receiver up to my ear, the sound I heard made me realize I was going down with the ship. Callahan, Detective O'Toole here. We need to talk. Nothing about this could be good. Then send over a black and white and have your boys bring me in. That is, if we do need to talk. The fear shot through me like an ice pick. My hands trembled. Fingers shook as I fumbled for a match, but my voice was calm, cool, in control. Turned out, O'Toole was more in control. Callahan, my boy, this isn't police work. This is business, personal business. I got my cigarette lit. We got no business, copper. There was a long, casual laugh from the receiver. Ah, Callahan, I think we do, but I understand. You must be tired from your long night at the bank with Mr. Arnott, and your dinner date with Miss Rita Malloy and her Russian friend Alex. For the love of Christ, he was an ugly one. Now tell me, boyo, are you packing? Getting ready for a trip, are you? He had the book on me. He was naming bodies, pointing to my longhand work, my last job. I get paid to make bodies, and he was reading my resume. Now, I want you to be a good boy. Take down this address. You meet me there in an hour. I felt the leash tighten. Good boy. I stood in the small, tiled hotel bathroom, cramped with cops, all in plain clothes. It was O'Toole's crew, detectives of some stripe or another, smiling along with O'Toole as they hunched over the bathtub. The only uniform I saw was out in the hallway at the door to the room. I thought it strange. He held the door open for me. No questions. I struck a match on the sink, lit my cigarette, and inhaled deep, calm, as the laughter stopped and O'Toole and his boys stood to look me in the eye. Ah, Callahan, my boy, so good to see ya. His voice booming off the white tiles. I dropped the spent matchstick on the floor. Cut the bullshit, detective. I ain't buying it and you shouldn't be selling it. Ah, Callahan, suppose I'm trying to help you. Suppose you are, copper. And suppose Christmas comes in July. Tell me, what am I doing here? You've been around the block a few times, Callahan. Maybe you think this might have something to do with it. The large, ornate white tub was filled with ice and blood-stained water. Lying in this back alley cocktail was an Asian man, about 5'7", and dead, very dead. And how does this help me, O'Toole? The cop laughed again. No, my boy. The only person this dead chink is gonna help is whoever got his kidneys. His laughter made me want to ice him right then and there, even more than his stupid racist shop talk. See, Callahan? These chinks, they do this shit all the time. They're fucking savages, all of them. His laughter was gone, replaced by a vicious, dripping hatred. They're not like us, Callahan. They terrorize us, come into our country, our city. Life doesn't mean anything to these yellow monkeys. Fucking savages. His rogue crew of officers of the peace all nodded in silent, solemn agreement. This wasn't the first crew of racist, crooked cops in this city, and if O'Toole had his way, they wouldn't be the last. My body must have already made a move towards the door, recoiling from this shit. One of his boys sidestepped in front of me, hand in his coat. O'Toole's glare darkened, looking through the walls. His voice came from somewhere else, from deeper inside his shit-filled brain, maybe from what he called a soul. And somebody, boyo, they gotta stop him. A chill cracked the room, reverberating off the walls and through my skin. And this is where I come in, detective. His eyes blinked several times, and his chuckle returned. Oh, dear Mother Mary. He lit a cigarette of his own. Forgive me, Callahan. I do get wistful from time to time. Now, where were we? Oh, yes. I'm here to help you, my boy. Gentlemen, could you give Mr. Callahan and myself a moment, please? His thugs filed out, touching the brims of their hats in salute to the copper they called boss. You see, Mr. Callahan, there's some distasteful things that go on in this city. Oh, of course you know that. After all, that seems to be how our paths have crossed, isn't it? You're no stranger to, well, let me be blunt, sir. Murder. Nah, of course you're not. I stared at the tub, the gruesome sight, and tried to keep my voice even. Murder is police business, O'Toole. Well, and if I may be blunt, Mr. Callahan, your business as well, am I right? Can I call you Sam? No. Get to the point, copper. We're standing at a crime scene. Tell me what I'm doing here. Say, my boy, how about a drink? Come with me. I think we've seen enough of this. I followed him into the living room. His boys were gone. But through the partially open door, I could see the uniform standing watch. How do you like your whiskey, Callahan? In a glass. I listened to him chuckle as he filled 2 highballs from the top shelf bottle, handed me one, and gently closed the front door. Now, what shall we drink to, my boy? Just get to the point, O'Toole. Tell me why I'm here. I got it. You got the book on me. Tell me what you want from me, copper. I put my drink back, set the empty glass on the coffee table, and lit a smoke. The second time this week I've drank a dead man's whiskey. You see, Callahan, there are some things that just don't look right on a police report. If something looks fishy, the newspaper jockeys get a hold of it. The next day it's all over the front page. Frightened citizens start jamming the switchboards, and a good cop just can't get any work done. I'm sure that's not a problem you have, detective. Ha! Another drink, son? I'll pass. Suppose you tell me who that is in the tub, and suppose you tell me why you're holding the book over me. He kept smiling, poured himself another drink, and looked me over. You're a smart one, Callahan, so I'm gonna level with you. The stiff chink in the ice bath, honestly, I have no idea who he is. It's not important to me anyways. But you, my good man, you are important to me. You see, as I said, I can't have the department investigate what's going on here. And this isn't the first, and most definitely not the last. I need eyes, ears, and someone I can trust to report back to me. I'm not your man, O'Toole. You're barking up the wrong tree. He slammed his glass on the table, but the shit smile on his face never left. You don't get it, do you, Callahan? I'm calling the shots here. I can't have my men wasting time looking into this. Honestly, I could give 2 shits if every one of these filthy chinks cut the guts out of each other till hell freezes over. But, well, the citizens pay our salaries, don't they? And like I said, we can't have every Tom, Dick, and Henrietta running scared to the station house worrying about some yellow bastard coming to cut out their vital organs to sell on the black market now, can we? He had me on the hook, and there was no way to wiggle off. I knew where this was going, and I didn't like the smell of it, not one bit. And what's in it for me? Ah, dear boy, such a professional you are. Of course. What's in it for you? I seem to be the only one here that can save you a trip upstate. See, that's how I know I can trust you, Callahan. You do me straight, or you go down for 50 to life. So what'll it be? I stood, picked up my hat, and made my way to the door. Oh, Callahan, my boy, don't worry about that trip you were planning. You'll be sticking around for a while. Understand? good boy. I stayed low, kept the room dark, and killed time waiting for word from O'Toole. He was going to make me jump, and if I liked my freedom, I better ask how high. I also knew O'Toole was a loose cannon, on the take, and as trustworthy as a hophead in a drugstore after closing time. But I had no choice. Running wouldn't work. He had to have eyes on my room and a tail on me wherever I went. I had to figure out how to get out of this mess, and the only way I could think was to play along, for now. Prison or a belly full of lead, my options were limited. In my line of work, it was never easy to get paid. This time, the pay wasn't going to come. All I had to do was live with it, and staying alive might be the only thing I had to work towards. That, and settling my score with this prick O'Toole. Some people were dumb enough to worship a god. Some worshipped money. O'Toole worshipped the color of his skin. I can understand worshiping money, but whatever people worshiped, there would be some poor sap dead at the end of the day. That's where I came in. I spent some shoe leather in Chinatown, making my way through dark bars and wet streets, letting a few greenbacks do my talking, a language we all understand down here in this city. Word on Shanghai Way was a dead end. Opium peddlers and bootleggers were the norm, just like everywhere else, but not a word on organ harvesters. O'Toole was running me down a rabbit hole, but I couldn't figure out his angle. I figured there was next to no truth in anything he said, except for the part about me. And I figured he was going to do me one way or another regardless. I just had to find out when it was clear to run and keep my head down till then. Late that night, the phone rang. It wasn't O'Toole, but one of his boys. The talk was quick, an address and a dial tone. How high? I pushed the car down the wet streets to the south end of downtown, the Zero, the place where business got done. People got done there too, and I was diving in head first. There wasn't a cop car in sight as I made my way to the door of the apartment building, up the stairs to room 101. The door was open. In the bathroom, a low-rent version of the same scene. Bathtub full of bloody ice water. A dead Asian man. This time with some fist marks on his face. There were also 3 other bodies, all Asian males, beaten bad, stacked up in the corner. Of course, O'Toole's men, plainclothes thugs, waiting for me. Their boss was nowhere in sight. They looked like rabid dogs after a fresh kill. Hold it right there, Callahan. The .32 was leveled at my gut. The tone in his voice told me all I needed to know. I'd been played for a sucker. One of the thugs walked into the living room, picked up the phone. He's here, boss. I turned just in time to take a blackjack to the head, dropping me to one knee, with one of O'Toole's goons blocking the door. I reached for my .45, but caught a wingtip to the jaw. Through the ringing in my head, I could hear the sirens in the distance. I heard my gun click across the tile floor, and I saw the blackjack come down again, hitting hard across my forehead, causing my head to bounce off the edge of the tub. Somehow, through the haze of the semi-consciousness, I saw a flash of steel, blocked the slash, and grabbed. I felt the bones in his hand break, grabbed the switchblade, and shoved. I felt his weight fall away from the blade as another fist came down from behind, hard, filling my head with a white flash as I blindly charged forward, throwing my body hard towards the 3 thugs. Crashing sounds of broken mirror and ceramics filled my ears as my head started to clear. Violent kicks and wrestling. Another punch. Blood filled my eyes as I struggled to my feet, swinging the knife wildly. The sirens drew closer. I pulled the blade out of another falling body, fighting to stay on one knee as another fist came down into my ribs. Catching my breath, I spun, sinking the knife deep into the belly of another crooked cop. As I got to both feet, I was hit hard. The last of O'Toole's killers swung the heavy towel rack, catching me in the temple. I felt the bars swing again above my head, missing by inches as I launched myself into the assailant, crashing hard through the door and into the living room. We both scrambled to our feet, my head swimming in pain, eyesight blurred, fists swinging. He caught me hard in the gut and I fell into the coffee table, gasping for air. Fighting to get back up, I felt the phone receiver in my hand and brought it down hard into his face, over and over. Filled with rage, with one hand on his throat, I hit him again and again. Blood and teeth flew into my face as I swung again and again. He fell limp on the floor, still breathing, gurgling through bloody pulp. I crawled to the bathroom, retrieved my .45, and used a pitcher of water to revive my fallen opponent. I let him spit out the last of his teeth, then shoved the gun barrel into his mouth. Here's the score. You take this phone, call O'Toole, and set up a meet. You make one cheap move and I paint this room with your brains. Got it? I gave him the spot, an alley, far from civilians, pulled the .45 out of his mouth and handed him the bloody phone receiver. I listened close to what he said as the sirens wailed in front of the buildings, footsteps scrambling up the stairs. I hung up the phone, blew his brains out, and made my way down the fire escape. Minutes later, I was standing in the rain, waiting for O'Toole, waiting to finish the job. I heard the car stop at the entrance to the alley, pulled my hat down low, and stepped out of the light thrown by the dripping street lamp. I heard the door slam shut, and O'Toole marched towards me, stomping angrily through the muddy alley. Larry, what the fuck nerve do you have making me come down to this nigger-infested shithole of a slum in the middle of the... He stopped ranting as I moved from the shadows, pointed the .45 at his head. Stop right there, O'Toole, hands up. Callahan, now, boy, let's put the gun down. We're both sensible white men. We can talk this over. Not another fucking word, O'Toole. You set me up. Wait. Let's just settle down. Not another fucking word. You're gonna have me take the fall for you and your thug's private little race war, you piece of shit. Let's just settle down, Callahan. I grabbed him hard by the throat, sinking my fingers in deep. He started to squirm away as I brought the pistol grip down hard across the bridge of his nose, loudly crushing bone. You try to pin me with your own little ethnic cleansing wet dream, running a death squad out of the top floor of the police department? You think I'm going to take the fall for your vile shit? Rage flowed through me as I brought the pistol down again and again, each time harder than the last. Crushed bone fragments and blood splashed into my face like mud as I continued, with my rage and O'Toole's brains blinding me. I felt him go limp and let go of his crushed throat. Dead weight hit the pavement with a moist thud. Catching my breath, coming back to myself, I slumped against the wall, lit a cigarette, and inhaled deep, like rats from a sinking ship, hearing the Pied Piper play his song, the vermin march along. Yeah, I know who I am and what I am. Callahan, Sam Callahan. The Pied Piper plays his song, and the city dances death. Thank you.
Eric Greenwald, thank you. Two weeks after returning to the overpass, I found no videotapes, but torn apart transistor circuitry, leaking from 27 1 by 2 by 10 inch metal boxes. A label identified as Howard Industries Electronic Ballast, and claimed they contained no PCBs. Although the ballast were labeled to contain no PCBs. Some had other hazardous elements. I learned from a guy whose brother is an electrician who said that there may have been enough copper in them for someone to think scavenging would be worth the trouble. The houses in Kent by the softball fields that used to have front yards full of cars that hadn't moved in years, and kids running around with sticks for guns, and dogs that wouldn't chase anyone anymore, were torn down to make way for condos that were never built. In Auburn, within sight of Emerald Downs, a man with a leather sleeve lashed to his arm would occasionally be standing by the trail to watch a falcon as it flew over the wetlands that were left between the industrial park with the wetlands mitigations and the freeways. Once upon a time, a man with a hammer could make a living off the fat of the man-made byproducts of the land. And for the love of the Grand Funk Railroad Black Sabbath Sons of Salmon-Hunting Raptors, avenge his honor with a machete in the parking lots of Kent. It's time now to pass the machete to our final reader, Dave Johnston, who will bring you the last thought that crosses your mind.
Wait a second, I need one more page. Thank you. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge a couple of friends of mine, Adam and Ruth, who are soon moving to New Zealand. I just want to tell you guys that you'll be missed terribly. Cheers. And as always, it's a pleasure to be associated with the Barroom Offensive and all these writers. Thank you very much. And now, the last thing, what was the title of this thing? The last thing that crosses your mind. Did you ever wonder why people have so much trouble at four-way stops in this city? I mean, really, what's up with that? Oh, and when I say people, I mean everybody except me, which, interestingly, includes you. What's wrong with you? I've seen you out there waving people to go and then, having fooled them, hitting the gas, then braking suddenly, cursing, and then dragging them back into your insidious web, waving them to go again. I mean, are you merely an unassertive person, or do you find an atmosphere of cowardice rewarding? Or are you just some sort of chaotic nutcase that a uncaring universe has set loose upon the rest of us? Well, I tell you it's none of these, because your hesitation is completely justified. Because what's stopping you is fear, and you have a reason to be afraid. You might not have heard about this, but just last Tuesday, the police found this Volkswagen van over here at 11th and Pine. It was 4 in the morning, it was raining. The van was sitting there running with its turn signal on. Nothing was wrong, except that the driver had died of terror. The color drained out of his skin, his fingers clutched the steering wheel, and his eyes were wide with fear. Rigor mortis had set in, so they had to cut off the steering wheel and bury it with the poor guy in a sitting position. As for the 2 cops who found him, one retired the very next day, and the other, well, the other keeps doing imitations of the dead guy, because not all cops are people persons. But here's where it gets weird. Finding a dead person at a traffic light, apparently it happens all the time. There were 4 last month at that same intersection. It's just that the police department doesn't want you to know about it, because they have no idea what's happening to these people. But I know. They all lost their nerve, and it's because of some choices made long ago. Choices made by very stupid people. It all started when the first train appeared in Seattle. That train, the fanatical Welshman, owned by the Northwestern Pacific Railroad, arrived in Seattle on November 13th, 1882, at night in a thick, choking rain. The Welshman didn't get the traditional welcome that trains typically got when they arrived in a new city. There was no politician with a long-winded speech, there was no cheering crowd, and there was no brass band. But this last part was unsurprising, as Seattle musicians back then were known more for focusing on the torment of the human soul rather than oompa tunes. But all of these were insignificant absences for the fanatical Welshman, because as it roared over the crest of Capitol Hill, what it was missing most was the final half mile of train track. Making the problem worse, what track there was ended on a 50-foot high half-finished trestle. You see, weeks earlier, the workers building this final stretch of track just wandered away. But before you judge these men as shiftless bastards, you have to realize what was wrong with Seattle back in those days. And I can't overemphasize this too much. People in the 1880s, especially in this city, were stupid. I mean, that's kind of obvious because they hadn't invented television or forks. But I don't mean regular, I'm a marionette of God, old-timey stupid. I mean, scared by matches and my own reflection in mirror stupid. Certainly everybody in Seattle started off as idiots, which is why they were drawn to this city like a drain. But once here, they all plumbed greater depths of dopiness. This descent to morality was aided by the fact that it had, for all of you non-historians, been raining in Seattle for 5 consecutive years in late 1882. Unending downpours all day and all night. That's impossible, you think. If you don't believe me, just dig down about 4 feet and you'll find 18 inches of liquefied mud. Then, when you're finished filling that hole up, feel free to come find me and apologize for never doubting me. Anyway, the other problem was that the people of Seattle depended on coffee to keep them moving, just like they do today. But unlike today, Seattleites in the 1880s drank frigid coffee made with beans smuggled into the city in the intestinal tracts of aged dogs. Additionally, this coffee was made in a rusted central reservoir by an old man with a hacking, persistent cough, who stirred the brew with a tar-covered ore before pouring it into lead-lined troughs that snaked around the city. By the way, if you're wondering who wins in the battle of intestinal bacteria of dogs versus tetanus versus old man mucus versus tar versus caffeine versus lead, it's always lead. After living in Seattle for 7 months, the railroad workers building the trestle had gotten just as stupid as the natives. Weeks before the Welshmen arrived, they'd all dropped their tools at the same time and found empty stools in the large canvas drinking tents that dominated the Seattle landscape like fungus. And that's where they were sitting when the fanatical Welshmen steamed into town. In their defense, they did pause in their drinking and shift uncomfortably when they heard the approaching howl of the Welshman's whistle. But feelings of guilt also lose to lead, so they went back to drinking. Everybody else in the city heard the screeching of locked-up train brakes, followed by the widening expanse of silence that fooled some of them into thinking that there might be, against all reason and basic principles of gravity, some sort of acceptable solution to a train keeling off a 3-story unfinished trestle. What kind of solution did they have in mind? Maybe, if the wind blew the right way, the train could make a smooth transition to the ground, sliding to a safe halt in the thick mud. Equally possible, a magical fairy fixing everything with their wand. Dring! These thoughts were ripped from their heads by the cataclysmic roar and shudder of 10 train cars stacking themselves on each other, like an 8-ton house of cards, followed by a boiler explosion that ripped the locomotive in pieces and set the splintered cars on fire. And that all happened right about 200 yards from where we're right now, right over here at 11th and Pine. That wreck would have been less catastrophic if anyone outside of Seattle had been told about the Welshman's demise, because that may have stopped the flaming Ukrainian from flying off the same trestle 2 days later, or the gender-neutral Filipino from somersaulting to the same fate 2 days after that. Sadly, each time they heard another train approaching, the people of Seattle thought that this one might be the one that finally survived. Luckily for everyone involved, it was at this point that the railroad ran out of trains. The Seattle train graveyard had not missed the gaze of the rest of the country, with some newspapers calling the city America's greatest shame, while others called it Bellingham, because they were bad at reading maps. The U.S. federal government, which until this point had done a noble job at ignoring the entire city, and had already tried to foist Seattle on Canada using the old bait and switch trick, decided to throw money at the problem. So shortly after the Filipino stopped smoldering, federal government officials arrived with an oversized $10 million check meant to pay for the completion of the track. If these federal representatives had been paying attention, they would have noticed the bland assurances and vague nodding that they were getting from the people of the city. Because there's no way Seattle was going to finish that track. Maybe if 2 trains had fallen on them from the sky, they might have finished it, but 3 trains was too many. No, the people of Seattle, the wet, cold, runny-nosed subhumans of Seattle, had a different plan. They were going to build their own form of mass transportation. They just had to choose what kind. And again, this is where stupidity raises its goofy, snaggletooth head. Because after years of sitting unsteadily on broken bar stools and staring at a cold, harsh, unending mudscape, their noses cold, red, and freely running into their beers, every person in Seattle, all 27,639 open-mouthed, slack-jawed, socially awkward halfwits, had dreamed up their own transit plan. To choose a plan, it was agreed that everybody would present their ideas, and so for the entire month of November 1883, in the largest beer tent in the city, every citizen lobbied vigorously for their own plan. As vigorously as a person could while sitting at a bar with a beer in their hand, mumbling without looking at anybody in particular, whispering persuasive speeches into their collars and occasionally sobbing. It should come as no shock that when the final count was held, there was, of course, a 27,639-way tie, with each plan receiving 1 vote. The closest there was to a winner was Joe Kelly and Ingemar Sturtevant, who agreed in principle to a mechanical beast of burden run on alcohol. But Kelly had his heart set on a grain-powered burro, while Sturdivant was stubbornly attached to a hops-assisted donkey, and the two never spoke again. You can see that the dreams of drunk people don't necessarily have any relationships that are rational. Anyway, by mutual consensus and little eye contact, it was resolved that all 27,639 projects would be built, and that each would receive an equal share of the government's money. That meant that each citizen of Seattle was given a check for $361.80, which, if I calculate correctly, is worth a little less than $400. Transit routes were decided by writing every location in the city on scraps of paper that were thrown into a hat. Every citizen picked 2 locations, and it was their job to fill the transportation gap between these 2 places, whether they were 3 miles apart or 5 feet. So cash in hand, the people of Seattle set out to build their private solution, and it wasn't long before transit fever gripped the city. Unfortunately, transit fever turned out to be polio. But soon, this polio epidemic was wiped out by the money toxins in Seattle coffee, and work began again. The next months were a happy time for Seattle. It still rained, people still got lockjaw and went temporarily blind. And then of course, there were the stabbings. But people joyfully worked to the sounds of constant hammering and sawing as each new form of transportation came to life. Of course, these people were, again, not bright. So they kept whistling when girders from a higher tramway crashed next to them. They chuckled when rolling in mud to extinguish their fiery clothing. They tipped their hat to a neighbor with their good hand, while the other newly handless wrist sprayed blood like a seltzer bottle. Most had no construction or engineering experience, but this didn't diminish their enthusiasm. And actually, enthusiasm was responsible for many of the violent explosions and surprise amputations. With the routes chosen at random, some areas were more congested with tramways, rails, tunnels, guide wires, and holes. For example, at the intersection of I Saw a Dog Lick Its Penis Here Street and I Woke Up Pantsless Over There Avenue. By the way, roads used to be named after the most exciting thing that ever happened there, which is now known as 11th and Pine. There were 37 different modes of mass transit crisscrossing. Some of the projects could, with the right amount of planning and knowledge, almost have worked. Linus Podworski's Podworski Go-Round rebuilt part of this neighborhood on a set of enormous Lazy Susans. In this way, walking times could be reduced or even completely eliminated if the building a person was headed to spun in front of them. Podworski's plan was to have each circle powered by an elephant, and he ordered 4 from India: Millie, Sophie, Emma, and Ragnar, the Destroyer of Dreams. Unfortunately, before setting sail for Seattle, Sophie broke loose from her restraints and dry humped a statue of the elephant-headed god Ganesha, despite buckets of water being tossed in her private areas. So instead of the typically trustworthy elephants, Podworski was forced to use goats, and as a result, the Podworski go-round was subject to the whims of dumb, can-eating creatures. Dennis Tiltwelk's subterranean pneumatic delivery system demonstrated the viability of sucking a lard-covered commuter from one location, and after an unpleasant, bruise-filled wild ride through fat back-covered underground chutes, expelling them 10 feet in the air, where they would hang helpless until Tiltwelk knocked them out of the air with a broomstick. Constance Courtney Sourweather actually brought the first bicycle to Seattle, ordering it from the Sears territorial catalog. It is only after her first ride that Sourweather realized that the devil was in the details, or in her case, the devil was between her thighs, calves, and lungs, burning with a pitchfork. Since effort had never been part of her plan, the first bike rider in Seattle history also became the first ghost rider in Seattle history when she disgustedly pushed the bike off the edge of a dock. Other forms of transportation were not as effective, but taught valuable lessons, such as Pirelli's dog bus, proving once and for all that dogs don't like being tied to buses. And that Mr. Pirelli was a bleeder. Marjorie Marie Kennewick's overpowered subelectric conveyor showed that even a properly propelled person could not, as Marjorie originally claimed, move faster than the speed of walls. Grant Fugamott's spinner, which wound people in cord and then ripped that cord away in the vain hope that they might eventually whirl and pinball their way to their destination, demonstrated that there was such a thing as centrifugally generated insanity. Of course, alongside all of these potentially dangerous forms of transport, there were also some guaranteed dangerous forms of transport, such as the steam rickey, a 2-story high gold dragon that could hold nearly 3 passengers in a dragon's head coach. As the steam built up in the rickey, its large clawed dragon-like feet would start to slowly rotate, dragging the entire works along with spine-shortening clanks as riders screamed in unison. They were still screaming 3 hours after the ride because they hadn't disembarked as much as they'd been shaken loose. Other conveyances worked well in certain situations, such as the salad tosser, built by Pierre Salad. The tosser was a spring-loaded trebuchet net device that pitched and caught its passengers and surprisingly worked amazingly well for persons weighing between 133 and 135 pounds. Unsurprisingly, for people outside of that weight range, it was a spring-powered deathapult, with fatalities being in equal parts awkward and spectacularly gruesome. It has to be noted that during the 1880s, there were no dignified deaths in Seattle. Nobody died in their bed from natural causes. Everybody died badly. Whether they were crushed, thrown, wedged, garroted, pancaked, engorged, imploded, filleted, or mutilated by a mechanical dragon that had acquired a taste for the blood of foreigners. Certainly there wasn't a horrific fatality every time somebody ventured across an intersection with, let's say, 37 different transit lines. But if a person flipped a quarter every time they had to cross, chances were that that quarter was going to be run over by something going 179 miles per hour, leaving in its wake a trail of broken bolts and skull fragments. But these were minor tragedies. And by minor, I mean there were a handful of deaths each week, but I mean that's not really too bad when you consider that there was more than 27,000 different vehicles built by imbeciles. And in that case, there's going to be a certain amount of attrition, a culling of the herd, if you will. Interestingly, it was, in fact, statistically impossible that there hadn't been a more colossal calamity, particularly at this intersection over here, 11th and Pine. But it hadn't, which really gives statistics a black eye. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that on the night of October 13th, 1887, statistical probability got its revenge. It started when the steam rickey lurched dangerously into the pathway of Abe Fendelman's balloon car. Stopping mere inches from tragedy, Abe Fendelman realized there was absolutely no reason his balloon car needed to be filled with gasoline. Which is when Pierre Salad, who had thoughtlessly been carrying a can of beer and consequently weighed 136 pounds, flew wailing sideways into the balloon car. The explosion sent passengers into the air and the steam rickey careening into a clanking, crank-powered leapfrog, while a spring-launched shaftless elevator flew into the pileup, its inventor, as always, screaming in unmoderated panic. Within 2 minutes, all 37 forms of transport had collided in this intersection, including constant Courtney Sourweather, who sadly had decided to give the bicycle a second chance. Finally, topping things off, the ghost of the Peworski go-round saw Salo's empty beer can and, ravenous, started moving backwards, which lent a kind of pepper grinder action to the terrible accident. On a side note, this might be why in Russia, Russian roulette is known as a Seattle four-way. In any case, what rocket cars, propeller-driven sledges, and sky trams that survived the accident were left to rust, topple, and sag. And while Seattle did not have a working transit system until 1952's hovercraft experiment, most accidents during the intervening years could be attributed to mass transit, as victims invariably asked, "Did you hear that?" before another piece of rusted transit infrastructure fell from the sky and crushed them. And if you don't think these stupid choices of the 1880s aren't still affecting us today, just look at the off-ramps nowhere. Monorails, trains that travel alone on one track, running into each other, bridges that sink, a viaduct that sways like a noose, and a light rail that was constructed underground so riders won't realize that they're traveling slower than an unmotivated child on a bike with a flat tire and sand. But there are more sinister echoes of this stupidity that can be heard in places like 11th and Pine. And I know that's what the driver heard last week, waiting at the intersection down there. Because late at night, that train you hear is an Amtrak. That's the Welshman making her final descent into Seattle. And that ship horn, that Petey Schoenfeld sidewalk trawler from October 13th, 1887, about to run into Heidi Kegel's dynamite-powered pedestrian mover. So, heed my warning. If you're sitting at that light down there, alone, and you swear you see a pump-powered, cantilevered, oscillating caterpillar with a ghostly conductor waving towards you, there's a part of your brain that might think that getting into it is a good idea. And that idea, my friends, that's what's going to scare you to death. Thank you.
Dave Johnston, thank you. And now, if history is any indication, and we're dealing with a realm of legends here, we'll be back in 3 months or so, if you can believe that, with another Barroom Writers Offensive. But this has been Legends from the Asphalt Jungle, once again produced by Barca Lounge and Soul Theft Records. And thanks to our readers, Mortimer K., Christian Storm, Eric Greenwald, and Dave Johnston. I'm Doug Newfer. Good night.